Hello, everybody. All right. So, Anthony Lenzo has a question for us right up from the beginning. So, let's jump on that first. Um, First, he asks if I'm feeling okay. Yes, I'm feeling okay. Except, um, emotionally, I don't know. That's going to make me sound a little, I don't know. I don't think I've always told people I'm an introvert, and most of the time, I do spend my time at home. So, uh, being in lockdown is not that big of a deal for me, except I think what it is that bothers me is that I don't like being told to be in lockdown. so, so anyway, it is a little bit um, weird for me, in terms of everyday life. This lockdown thing is not that big of a deal. But in terms of the philosophical implications, it's really messed up. But I won't go into that. This is a trumpet forum, trumpet uh, discussion. All right. Um, what do I think of lead pipe buzzing? Is it beneficial or is it just hype? And I'm going to tell you that there's very few things when it comes to exercises that I think are just hype. Um, Now I don't do the lead pipe buzzing. It was taught to me by Armando Gatala. I took one lesson with Armando Gatala, and he taught me. By the way, what he taught me was different from what all these guys are doing. Right? So the way I see the exercise stuff is if you get a benefit out of it that you want, then you should be doing it. So I have nothing against the lead pipe buzzing. Nothing at all. I don't do it. You know what I do have something against, when it comes to hype, I'm against hype that people want to sell you something. Hype for a book, hype for a product, hype for not everything that's being sold is being bought with money, right? Sometimes what they're trying to sell is not so much a product, but a ideology or a philosophy, right? So the benefits for doing lead pipe have to do mostly with aperture control and air. You can't do and I can't speak for the way other people do it. I can only tell you what Armando Gatala told me. There's something very cool that happens. Now, what he taught me, I don't mind. I just did a video today, and I went, I don't know, I might have talked about 5 minutes saying how I don't do exercises in public. I don't believe in doing exercises in public, but to demonstrate something, I don't mind doing that. I just won't. You'll never find an example of me trying to show everybody how wonderful I am by playing some stupid exercise. Right? Not going to happen. Anyway. All right. So what he wanted me to do was find that fundamental note and then play a major scale up from there. That was the only exercise he taught me. I think that was the only thing he was doing. in that regard, now obviously I'm not very good at that because I don't do it. That's like the first time I've done it in several years. Okay. Um, but obviously that's a lot like doing lip bends because you're trying to play in between the partials. You're trying to get a good sound. Now, when they call him Mundi, right? If I remember right. So I was introduced to Armando Gatala by Richard Schaefer. The two of them were friends, and it was Schaefer that set up a lesson for me. At the time, Dick Schaefer was second trumpet in the Houston Symphony. So, uh, it's about aperture control. Those are my words. Okay. The mouthpiece buzz is about aperture control. Now, and air, because if you're not doing the air right, it's not going to happen. I can't speak for any other method of using the lead pipe because I don't know anything about what those guys are doing. And the biggest reason why I don't use that stuff myself is I already had all my stuff figured out when I took that lesson with Gatala. You know what happened when I took that lesson? And I've been very careful not to say too much about that lesson because he was extremely complimentary to me. And because he's passed away, I've always been concerned if I say too much about this, that people will think that I'm lying. And just, I don't know. But he was extremely complimentary. After I played, he asked me to play for him. I played an etude, and his response was, well, you obviously don't have any chop problems. Why are you here? Now, for Armando Gatala to say something like that, that's actually a very, very high compliment. He actually didn't stop there, but I'll stop there. And the only reason I shared that, I think this is the first time I've told anybody that, because I really don't think people believe me when I say stuff like that. So, but yeah, most of what we did in the lesson had nothing to do with chops. And like I said, and the reason I said that is because by the time I got to that lesson, I already had all the chop stuff figured out. That was in 1991, maybe 1992. No, probably 91. Anyway, so that's the only thing I know about mouthpiece buzz. So Michael asks any details on the All-State Jazz Etudes. So the Etudes officially come out on May 15th. So that's every year. Every year the Etudes come out on May 15th. Okay. So that's that. Okay. That's, you can't. You know what you can do, and this is, I'm going to be doing a video on this, I hope, if I don't get too busy. The time that you have right now is not better spent working on the etudes when they come out. The time spent right now is better spent developing skills and gaining experience. So if you are serious about competing in All-State Jazz next year, and this applies to anything really, if you're serious about I'm sorry, I gotta read this, sorry. All right. So if you're serious about becoming competitive in All-State, now is the time to do three main things, okay? And I'm making this up. There might be 5 things when I get done with the video. Number one is you want to spend a lot of time listening to big band music, because that's what you're auditioning for, and the judges can tell if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, so that's the number one thing you want to do. I mean number one in terms of what's most important. That doesn't mean don't practice, okay? But the most important thing you have to do between now and the time that music comes out is spend a lot of time listening to big band music. And when I say big band, it can either be that old dance band style stuff like the Glenn Miller stuff, or old Duke Ellington stuff, Count Basie. You can listen to that, or if you'd rather listen to more modern stuff, you can listen to, there's a bunch of awesome, more modern jazz bands out there. Like, I think the most popular is probably the Big Fat Band, right? And so you want to be listen to the North Texas 1 o'clock band. So that's number one. You want to be listening. Get that sound in your ears. And then number two, now I forgot what the three were. Gaining new skills. So, for example, the video I'm putting out tomorrow is about shakes. I'm calling it 3 Steps to Master Shakes on the trumpet, right? So, and that's the video I did earlier today. And, but yeah, if you can't do a shake, don't wait till the music comes out to learn how to do a shake, right? And this is true for all the skills. You want to have every skill you're going to need. So what kind of skills am I talking about? Being able to play in every key, right? And, a lot of people might think, well, that's wasted time. What if I don't have to use 4 sharps? What if I don't have to use the key of F sharp or A flat? What if I never have to use that? There's something that happens in your mind when you can play all 12 keys fluently. And I'm not talking about all 12 scales. I'm talking about being fluent in all 12 keys so that you can sight read in those keys, you can improvise in those keys. You're just like right at home in those keys, right? If you don't have that, you should get that. This is the time to get that skill. Now, I'm going to pitch one of my books because that's what this book is for. The Total Tonalization, or any of my tonalization study books, that's what it's for. Is it gets you thinking in that key. It gets you acclimated to that key. And in fact, if you do the expansion, I said this in one of the other Q&As before. If you do the expansions, whatever scales that you don't know yet, do the expansion. I have another book called, it's an ebook, Major Scale Expansion Studies. You do those first, then you do the tonalization studies for that key. Do it for at least a week, maybe a month. But if you're trying to get ready for Allstate, then you want to do about a week. And then you're going to have skill in that key. So all of the skills you might need, rhythmic skills, sight reading skills. If your chops aren't high enough to play the Allstate cut, get those skills. That's number 2. Number 3 is to gather experience. And what you want to do to gather experience is to play music. You can do sight reading. You can work on get the Charlie Parker Omni book and practice that. There's a wonderful book. I think it's Count Basie Big Band Charts. And it's a book of all the lead trumpet parts. That's a great book, right? And you can listen to all the recordings and play with the big band. So those are the three things that I tell people to do. I'll probably come up with more things, but those are the three things. You want to listen, you want to gain new skills, and you want to get more experience playing. And in lockdown mode, that means buying music and working on it. All right. I hope that answers your question. More than answers it, I'm sure. Javier says, hello, greetings from Chile. That's someplace I've never been. I've not been to South America yet. I would love to go to Chile. I really would. One of these days, huh? I'm a big fan, big fan of, I think it was called Música de los Andes, and folk music, but from the mountains. And I was on a salsa gig in a festival, and we were playing right after a group from right, not the best time to travel. We were playing right after a group. I think they were from Colombia, and but yeah, I really liked that folk music from down there, and it was mostly guitars and women singing. I don't remember any men in the group, but it was awesome music. Anyway, so we do have one question. Let me see if any of you guys have new questions before I get to this question that we had before we started. This person wants to know how do you work on getting a steady tone and a steady pitch? So if there are no new questions, we'll answer that question now. I did write about it in my blog. And usually the blog and the video come out a little bit different from each other. So I guess I'll jump into it then. I'm going to write that down. Sebastian Jordan. I'll look that up. Okay. Thanks for that. All right. So first thing you need to know about getting a steady pitch and getting a steady sound is that steady pitch and steady sound are connected. Now, some people make the mistake. So, if you do so Anthony says sometimes he forgets some of the minor harmonic scales, harmonic minor. Not always, but I try to go over them every day. If you use the tonalization studies on the harmonic minors, you won't forget anymore. It acclimates your fingers, and it's you don't have what is there to forget if it's like hardwired, right? The ooey and the pucker exercise is only for beginners? No, You've been reading the physical trumpet pyramid book. So, well, good. The ooey exercise is for strength building. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner. Now, the reason I mention it for beginners in the book is because a lot of times beginners have such weak lips that they can't even play the lowest notes on the trumpet. Now, I haven't had any beginners like that in a while, but I have had plenty in my career. Beginners that their lip buzz was so low, and that's not even on the trumpet, right? And so here's what the ooey exercise is. We go ooh and e, ooh, e, And we do that 500 times. The most that I've ever done it has been when I'm driving. I used to make the trip between here and El Paso, which is about, if I'm not mistaken, about 800 miles. And I would do it like between here and San Antonio, and then I would rest, and then I would do it again about Kerrville, and then I would rest, and then I would do it again in Fort Stockton. By the time I get to El Paso, my lips are raw. But yes, the whole point of that exercise is to make your lips tired. And when your lips become tired, the natural process that kicks in afterwards makes your lips stronger. Okay? So that's why we do that. Now, the pucker exercise, that's different. And I can't demonstrate that with a beard. What you do is you pucker so much that it squeezes all the blood out of your lips. It's an isometric exercise. You're squeezing and holding, and you just hold it until the blood comes back in. And you have to be looking in the mirror because you'll have no clue that the blood has made its way back in. So it's actually been a long time since I've actually did any of that with a student. It's been, I think, about 5 or 6 years since we did any of those exercise. So, well, that's great. I'm glad you're doing that book. So now, let me get back to what we were talking about. There is a connection between tone and pitch, but the mistake that some people make is to think that one is cause and the other is effect. It can go both ways. So if this pulls that way or that pulls that way, you're still going to have, you're still going to have problems, okay? Yes, so doing those exercises, you should do it before you go to sleep. Okay, I'm going to save your question, Santo Domingo. Okay, we'll get to that. Let me finish answering this other question. By the way, the guy who asked this question, he is a missionary in Turkey. So I'm very happy to answer his question. I'm happy to answer everybody's question. But yeah, this guy's a pastor, and he's an evangelist in Turkey. So that's wonderful. So if we're trying to create a steady pitch or a steady tone, the first thing we want to do is be still. Okay? And here's the problem with the steadiness is being still. We're going to work from being still from the frame, right? Because if you're sustaining a note and you shift your weight, you're going to get a bounce in the sound. Okay? Okay, I'm over exaggerating that, but this is a thing. You see this mostly with beginners. Beginners, they'll shift their weight. They don't realize they're shifting their weight. There's been nothing in their life yet to tell them. We're talking about beginners here. There's been nothing in their life yet to tell them that everyday movement that's normally okay is not okay while you're playing your trumpet. So we often have this, I call it fidgeting, squirming, right? We often have this squirming problem with the beginners when they first start. And so that's the most basic. But then as you get better, the focus becomes more and more on the more sensitive areas. And So any change you make in your lips, the aperture, any change you make with the teeth, any change you make with the tongue is going to affect the tone. So you could have movements that are so slight you don't realize you're even moving, and it's going to change the tone. I hope that makes sense. Okay? Even the slightest movement. And sometimes just tonguing, right? Because a lot of people will tongue, they'll do like this, and then they'll pull the tongue down, and the process of pulling the tongue down is going to shift everything in the mouth. And so you get these articulations that have like weird sounds associated them, because with the jaw is not staying still, the aperture is getting loose or being destabilized and stuff like that. So any of that stuff that happens is going to affect the sound that comes out. So that's what we do on the sound side, is we just strive to be steady physically. Okay? We strive to be steady physically. On the pitch side, now if you get the sound, a lot of the pitch becomes better if you get the sound to be stable. And vice versa, also. If you get the pitch to be stable, the sound will be stable too. They are connected. But I just don't see cause and effect going one direction. So let's talk about, how do you get pitch to stay stable? The way you, so one thing you might notice, if you bend notes, bending down is easy. Bending up is not so easy. See how that popped into the next harmonic? Okay? It's very hard to bend like up a half step or something. Easy to bend down a half step. Now, to stabilize the pitch, we push ever so slightly, not so much that it pushes, too hard up into that pocket, but we push into that ceiling. That ceiling that we're pushing up into, by bringing the pitch up just a tiny bit, is very steady. It's when it comes to being steady on the pitch, that is the steadiness. It's built into the way the horn works. Now, some people will say, if I do that, I'm going to get a brighter sound. Well, yes, you will get a brighter sound. So you have to compensate by opening up a little bit more. You don't have to get a brighter sound. If you do everything that you always normally do, but do this too, you will get a brighter sound. But so what you have to do is do this thing where you're pushing the pitch up into the ceiling, but then open up more so you get a nicer sound. Okay? And that's easier said than done, right? It's a great, simple concept. Not so simple to do. But that's my answer to that problem. I think I went into more detail on the blog, so you can go to the blog and read that. That's El Tigre Do. I'll put the link right here. Okay, I just put the link in the comments. And I did post a blog about that this morning. And, rarely is what I say the same thing as what I write. That's why it's nice to have the books and the lessons, the books and the videos, the books and you know what I mean? Because what I write is a little bit more organized, but what I when I'm speaking, I'm actually more, just because of rent, it's like a shotgun pattern, right? I'm actually more comprehensive when I'm speaking. All right. Anyway, so getting on to Santo Domingo's question, why do people consider Miles Davis a great player when you've got people like Clifford Brown and Dizzy Gillespie? Well, it just happens to be that Miles knew that he wasn't the player that Dizzy was. That's part of jazz history. He knew he would. The quote I remember is he said he would never be as good as Dizzy Gillespie. He actually said that. Okay, you have to remember that, and it took me a long time to understand this. We think as trumpet players that something is good because it's hard, right? So like a solo, like for a solo contest is good because it's hard. A piece for band is good because it's hard, and that's just not true. There's a lot of really hard stuff out there that's just not good. Okay, and I'm not talking about jazz players. Okay, but the concept is the same. So when we look at Miles Davis, we're not saying, "Oh, look how fast he played, look how high he played." We're not looking at that same kind of stuff. When we look at Miles Davis, we're looking at the more musical stuff, not the more technical stuff. Now, he was pretty technical too. You know, the guy's career spanned 5 different style periods. He was in he was on some of Charlie Parker's albums. He played gigs with Charlie Parker. And then he was in the post bop era, and then he went through the cool era. So he went through all these different stages. And so really what you're looking at with Miles is an example of what I've been saying all these years about how the music is connected to the people. He's telling stories. He's creating atmosphere. He's doing all these more creative things. He's not just playing lines. And I think most of what you learn I don't fault the students. I fault the teachers, really. Because all the teachers, you want to take a jazz class, and what are they going to do? They're going to tell you, play this scale on that chord, play that scale on that chord. That's not jazz. I'm sorry. And you know what? I can tell as a judge, when I judge school competitions and stuff like that, I can tell, this is how I see it. Whatever it is you're thinking about, that's what I'm going to hear. And if you're thinking about scales, that's what I'm going to hear is scales. If you're thinking about patterns, that's what I'm going to hear is patterns. But if you're thinking creatively and making music, I'm going to hear music. And that's what Miles Davis did. I'm not saying those other guys didn't. Okay? Clifford Brown was an extremely musical player, so was Dizzy Gillespie. I got to hang out with Dizzy Gillespie before he died. I have a few stories that I tell to my students about that. I went to a party with him. So, anyway. So, yes, that's what we're listening for. It's not how good he is. I mean, you know what I mean? I'll never forget the first time I heard Freddie Hubbard. Freddie Hubbard is an awesome, awesome player. But the first thought I had was, boy, that's a terrible sound. I don't feel that way anymore. But when I first heard his sound, it was like one of the earliest jazz players I ever heard. I mean, in my career, one of the first guys I ever heard. And I could not believe that some professional player could have a sound like that. But then different albums, he had different sounds. So, all right. So I hope that answers the question. Javier says, what would you recommend as a warm down, pedals or no need for warm down? I sometimes have to warm down, but not normally. It really depends on what kind of embouchure you use. Okay. Normally, I don't do a warm down at all. I think the only time I do a warm down, here's me doing a warm down, right? I just had 4 gigs on Saturday. The last gig, and I'm not making this up. This. I used to work like this, right? I don't work like this anymore on purpose. I don't need to stroke my ego. I don't need to go around telling people, oh, I have 5 gigs in one day. I don't need that. What I need is the money, and that's not a good way to make money. So, but back in the, about 15 years ago, I would commonly do 4 gigs on Saturday, and that last gig was a salsa gig, and my lips would get kind of beat up. If I have a church gig the next morning, delicate classical playing, yes, I'm going to do a warm down, and I'm going to do more than just pedals. So what I like to do for a warm down is out of the Schlossberg book. And I'm trying to play that as soft as I can, almost to the point of whisper tones. Then the next one. I'm going to take that all the way down to low F sharp. That's usually what I do. As I don't do pedals. I don't know why I don't do pedals on a warm down. But cool down, you're calling it a cool down. But this is a very personal thing. I would say try different things. Normally, I don't do a cool down. I just put the horn in the case, go home. But if I have damage, I'm going to do something so that I can play tomorrow. Okay? Anthony says, just curious, do you have any vintage horns? I have a Con 22B from 1935. I don't have anything that old, no. You're welcome, Javier. No, nothing like that. I recently acquired that. I bought it so I could sell it. It's a Quinon, but I think that's just from the 70s. So nothing in the old stuff, no. I was gonna sell that Quinon because I thought the Quinons were too small, and maybe it is technically small, but I didn't think I was gonna get a good sound on that horn. And man, and it's in such beautiful condition, and it's still officially for sale. Someone actually asked about it right before this lockdown. He asked, and then I told him, yeah, it's officially still for sale. I say officially, right, because I don't want to let it go. I'll tell you why. My flugelhorn, the one I use on all the gigs, is it's in bad shape. It looks, it looks like from the townships, that kind of horn, So it's in bad shape. I still play on it. You know what I've been doing lately? I have this thing that I do sometimes where I'll do 50 choruses of improv on the one tune. I have a little checklist. Each time I finish a chorus, I put a check mark. Well, what I started doing was 5 choruses on this horn, 5 choruses on that horn, and then towards the end, right? Number 45 to 50. No, wait. 35 to 40. 35 to 40, I'm playing on my piccolo trumpet, improvising jazz stuff on my piccolo trumpet. So yes, and I still like my Yamaha. I got that in 1980, but it's been on almost every gig with me that I've had since 1980. And it's been repaired many times over, and it's just in bad shape right now. It's in horrible shape. Um, and and this 19, I think it's about 1970 Quinan is almost mint condition. So the Yamaha is the same one that Chuck Mangione played. I'll bring it out. I still have the original case. I wasn't using the case for a long time. Look at all the dents. And this tube is not welded in anymore. And yeah, it's just in bad shape. The valves are fine. It's a Yamaha, let's see, it's either 631 or 651. I'm not much of a equipment guru. And mostly that's because of money, right? So, this horn has been with me. It's enough to make me sentimental, and I'm not even sentimental. It's been to Europe with me 3 times. I've never gone to South Africa with it because that's when they changed after 9/11, they changed how hard it is to take a horn on, and I don't take 2 horns anymore. But yeah, this horn I played in Mexico with it. I played in all over the country. It's been to almost every gig I've been to since 1980. And I love the horn. I love the way it sounds, but I feel like if I don't look for a horn now, that I'm going to get stuck. That thing's going to die on me, and I'm going to end up not having a horn. So, but when we bought this flugelhorn, this other flugelhorn, the Quinan, I just fell in love with it. It's still not as good as my Yamaha, but it's now what I'm going to do, and this is going to have to wait until we have money because of the I know I mentioned this before. All of my gigs, that money that we lost from the gigs is money it's not extra money. That's money that we live on, right? And so any purchases right now are going to have to wait till all this stuff gets resolved. But I want to get because I use a Warburton mouthpiece on the Yamaha, a Warburton FLX, a 2 FLX, and I want to get a 2 FLX. The difference between the Yamaha and the Quinan is the Quinan has what they call a French shank. So technically, my flugelhorn mouthpiece doesn't fit. I've been playing on the one that came with the horn, which doesn't fit my lips, and so I can't really do a gig like that because it'll screw me up. Anyway, that's enough equipment talk. In the tonalization section of the Daily Routines book, what do you mean by this quote? Small notes are to be played only in the sharp keys. So when you get down to the bottom of so those are the abbreviated tonalization studies. Okay. If I were to write those out in every key, the book would have been at least 1,000 pages long. Okay, so I came up with this system based on, by the way, a violin method. There's a violin method that my ex-wife used to practice out of. I can't remember the name of it, Sheshvik or something like that. And they do the same exercises over and over again, but with changing the key signature. So I came up with that same concept to save paper for the daily routines books. And so if you look, so when you follow I wish I could share screen here, right? And show you guys, because I do that in Skype all the time. I can show you the music and hover the cursor over it and show you. But anyway, if let's say we're doing the group 1 tonalization. Now the notes after that are little Q notes, because we don't play low F natural unless it's a pedal tone, but we do play low F sharp. So those little, if we are playing in C or any other key that's not sharp, we skip those 6 notes. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, right? Don't they look smaller right there? Those notes, the note heads are smaller. They're precisely 70%, 75% of the other size. So they're 25% smaller. Okay? Those notes, you skip them if you're in a key that doesn't have F sharp in them. All right? Now, I'm big on going all the way to F sharp. Okay? I'm real big on that. I think, let me tell you about this. Because I think that the reason my students tend to not struggle with chops is partly because I believe that the change that you make from the lowest register to get to the middle register is exactly the same change that you make to get from the middle register to the high register. And if you don't have the beginner students do those lowest notes as soon as they can, they never experience that change in register. But because my students, when I start them, they have that experience of changing register from the beginning. I don't have to teach them anything. I don't have to tell them what to do with their tongue. I don't have to tell them what to do with their lips or what to do with their jaw, because they've already gone from the lowest register to the middle register. They already do that. You know, a lot of beginner books don't go any lower than C or B flat. I make everybody go down to the lowest register. Okay? And when we do that, we're learning the same mechanisms that get us to the higher notes. Now, it does take more strength, but it's not, if you go up an octave, that's not twice as much strength. Look at it mathematically. It's not double. It's more like 1/3 more strength. I forget the exact numbers, but you don't need and by the time you get to the highest notes, the change in strength that you need to get from the G above high C to the strength that you need for super C, it's tiny compared to what you need to go from the G beneath that to high C. That's a huge skip. Same thing, you know, a student that can play tuning note C and struggling with E above that, you know, like fourth space E, that's a much bigger jump, physically speaking, in terms of strength, than going from the G above high C to super C. So there is a strength issue, but it's not as much of a strength issue as most people try to make it out to. I think the reason why they stress so much of the strength stuff is because it helps them sell their stuff. Okay? Because, it's easy to sell, it's easy to put the music thing into a square box, the round peg into the square hole, just by pounding it and making it into something it's not. And I'm speaking what do you call that? Metaphorically. I'm speaking metaphorically, but the science behind playing high does not involve blowing your brains out. So but thinking of that way is a simple way of making things work. Does that make sense? Anyway, so that's why I push everybody down to the lowest notes from the very beginning. There's no reason not to play those notes. There's absolutely no reason to play the notes below C. I've never heard a legitimate reason. And yet they don't teach the kids that stuff until 5-6 years into it, when some low F sharp comes up in I remember in wind ensemble in college, we had low F sharp double tongued on some wind ensemble piece. Right? You should have seen that. That was funny. But if you look at all my materials, all of my double tongue and triple tongue stuff goes down to low G and low F sharp. Okay. That's right. Javier says the way you structure the sessions in the week is what sports they call periodization. Right. That's correct. So that's, it was my brothers that taught me that stuff, because they were both jocks. And when I first learned all this stuff, I was also working out with my brother. We lived in El Paso at the time, and we were exercising with the soldiers on base. That's correct. Alternating between mid, low, hard effort days. So the pattern I do is medium, hard, and easy. Then I do it again. Medium, hard, easy. Then we take one day off. Okay. Great questions today. Anybody have any more questions? I think I answered more questions than what you guys asked. This is real funny. My wife, after I'm finished, she'll often say, she says, "I thought you were an introvert." And I'll be running my mouth off like this for an hour. And same thing. I have a friend in South Africa, and if I remember right, he texted me and says, "Wow, you talked for a whole hour." When I first started doing these, I don't feel like I'm talking that long. Yeah. So all right. Any more questions? This virus stuff, what it's doing to the musicians is really messed up. It's not I'm not talking about, well, you know what? There's two things so yes, the virus itself, I think, is affecting musicians disproportionately. because the guys that I know, that I have several friends that are in the hospital right now, um, and and then we have some of those celebrity musicians that have passed away from the virus. And so, no, there's that part of it. But this thing where the social distancing is, a lot of musicians, they're married to people who have money. The truth is, if you're making music as your career, it doesn't pay enough to make a living. It's just true. But the people who do make their living that way are living if they don't have a spouse that supports them, so to speak, um, the 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 people who are living this way are living close to the edge all the time. It's that whole starving artist thing. And you take what little income they have away, and they're basically homeless. They're basically homeless. And so I don't know how long this is going to go on. I hope it's over soon. And I don't voice my opinion about that anywhere, because I know people are very sensitive. Yeah, people are very sensitive, and they say, "Well, you just want to kill us all," and they don't have a clue what this is doing um, to people now. So for me, it's different. See, I'm going to share with you guys what we could call a testimony. Um, I believe God prepared me for this, not just financially, not just musically, also emotionally. Um, and when I was going through it, it was 2016 when this happened to me, and I was thinking, why is this happening? I wasn't doing anything wrong, and stuff was going bad, and it forced me to shift the way I make a living. Part of it was I stopped taking so many gigs, right? I already told you guys that. But it was more than just that. And so I started teaching more Skype lessons, and the publishing thing, we started getting the publishing thing going better. And you know what? What's real weird, and I might have even mentioned it on one of these live Q&A sessions. I mentioned what was it in September? I started telling people, and I think I mentioned it here. I really do. I started telling people that God was giving me a sense of urgency to publish a bunch of this stuff that I was working on, to get it over the finish line. And I really believe that this is what that was about. So by really pushing in that time from September until the lockdown, by really pushing the publishing, I'm not going to say that everything's okay, because it's not okay. All right, it's not okay, but it's not desperate either. Okay, and I know that a bunch of people are not in the same shoes I'm in. A bunch of people are in. So, like, for example, I'm not going to lose my house. We're not going to have trouble paying our bills, stuff like that. But it's going to be it's tight. It's tight, right? But really, I think the push from September to now has taken a lot of the bite off. And yeah, I really think that happened. I really think that's what it was about, is what I'm saying. Both what happened in 2016 and what that push, that urgency that I felt. I think that urgency. So, like, what did we published like 5 books in that time, and a bunch of compositions, and um, and our spikes. We've had a spike in royalties over that time. So it's been a lifesaver. And by the way, thank you guys for buying the books, because that's helping us a lot right now. That does make a big difference. Okay, so we have royalties coming in from several different sources. We've got the compositions, we've got the recordings. So the recordings are still, I can't believe, it's amazing how much my recordings are being played all over the world. Basically 45,000 streams per quarter. So you're looking at 180 streams per year. 180,000 streams per year. I don't know any no-name musician that has that kind of, and that's just Spotify too. We get from other sources. That's just Spotify. So yes, we have been blessed. So we have books, we've got compositions, we've got the recordings, and there's some other stuff that we have. I can't recall off the top of my head, but those are the main 3 ones. So anyway, and you guys are a big part of that. You really are. And I want you guys to know that I do appreciate every single thing that you guys do to help makes a big difference. So anyway, all right. So I guess we're done. It's nice hanging out with you guys. We will try this again next week. Well, I was talking to somebody. Somebody asked me something, and I said, "Yeah, I'll have to see if I can fit it in my schedule." It's not like we're going anywhere, right? Oh, yes. Javier says, thank you for making this material. I was looking a long time ago for a book like this with a well-organized system for daily, weekly practice. Well, you're welcome. That's what it's for. I put down sometimes people who will just try to scam you just to sell you stuff. And I know that I'm selling stuff too. And sometimes it can sound like I'm a hypocrite. The thing is that this stuff, I don't promise you the world, right? Somebody asked me about the one range book the other day. He says, "Will this give me a higher range?" I said, "I can't tell you that, right? I don't know anything about your playing. How am I going to say you're going to get a higher range? There might be a reason why you don't get a higher range." But a real salesman would have said, "Yes, this will give you a higher range." But I'm not a real salesman. Anyway, thank you guys. God bless you. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for hanging out. Bye.